The night started with champagne and the kind of forced laughter people wear like masks at corporate parties. Amanda was in her element, stunning in a black dress that hugged her figure just enough to turn heads without seeming desperate. I'd always admired her confidence, the way she commanded a room. That night, though, her energy felt different. Too sharp, too hungry for attention. We arrived together, but the moment we stepped into the venue, it was as if I vanished. She left my side, weaving through the crowd with her glass raised like a queen greeting her subjects. I followed at a distance, watching her light up with laughter, touching arms, leaning closer to her coworkers, too close for comfort. Then there was him, tall, smug, with a perfectly tailored suit that screamed, overcompensating. I'd seen him before, hovering around her desk during an office visit. At the time, I brushed it off as workplace camaraderie. But tonight, I couldn't ignore the way his hand lingered on the small of her back as he whispered something in her ear. Her laughter at his words was louder than it should have been, drawing glances from others. I told myself to stay calm. It was a party, after all. People drank too much, got too friendly. Amanda would never cross a line. At least that's what I wanted to believe. Until the toast. The CEO called for everyone's attention to give a speech. Glasses clinked as he droned on about teamwork and excellence. But my focus was on Amanda. She was standing too close to him again. They exchanged a look that sent my stomach into a freefall. When the CEO cracked a joke, everyone laughed. Except for me. I was too busy watching his hand slide down Amanda's arm. A gesture so casual it was anything but. My pulse was racing now. I tried to brush it off, but a voice in my head wouldn't shut up. She's not pulling away. When the speech ended, I made my way over, trying to be subtle. As I approached, I heard Amanda say something that stopped me cold. "You're terrible," she giggled, swatting at his chest. But maybe I like terrible. It wasn't just the words. It was the way she said them, playful and coy, the tone she used to reserve for me. My hands clenched into fists as I closed the distance. "Am I interrupting?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. They both turned to me, Amanda's face a picture of mock surprise. "Oh, hey, babe," she said, as if I just appeared out of thin air. "This is Brandon, my colleague from the marketing team." "Brandon," I said flatly, offering a hand that he shook with a smirk that made me want to wipe it off his face. "We were just talking shop," Amanda added, a little too quickly. Brandon chimed in, "Yeah, Amanda was just telling me about that brilliant pitch she came up with last week. You must be proud of her." I didn't miss the subtle jab, the way he looked at me like I was the outsider here. But what could I say without causing a scene? The room was filled with her colleagues, people who'd probably side with her no matter what. I forced a smile, but inside, something was cracking. As the night wore on, Amanda became more and more brazen. She laughed at his jokes with abandon, touched his arm casually but deliberately, and acted as though I was just another guest at the party. By the time dessert was served, I'd had enough. I grabbed her arm as she passed me on the way to the bar. "We need to talk," I said, low enough that no one else could hear. She sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. "Can it wait? I'm in the middle of something." I stared at her, stunned by the dismissal. In the middle of what, Amanda? Flirting with Brandon? Making me look like an idiot? Her eyes flashed with irritation. "Don't start this here. You're embarrassing yourself." I opened my mouth to reply, but before I could, her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced at the screen, her expression shifting to something that looked like panic before she quickly stuffed it into her clutch. "What was that?" I asked, my voice rising. "None of your business," she snapped, her mask slipping for just a moment. I was about to press further when she plastered on a fake smile and leaned in close, her voice a venomous whisper. "If you can't handle a little socializing, maybe you should go home." It wasn't just her words. It was the icy contempt in her tone. For the first time, I wondered if I even knew the woman standing in front of me. I let her go, watching as she sauntered back to Brandon without a second glance. My head was spinning, my heart pounding in my chest. The party was still in full swing, but for me the night was over. Or so I thought. Because what happened after the party made everything that came before it seem like child's play. That I left the party before Amanda, unable to stomach another second of her blatant disrespect. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel, replaying the night in my head. The way she laughed with Brandon. The way she dismissed me like a stranger. That phone notification, her reaction to it wasn't normal. She was hiding something, and I needed to know what. When I got home, the house felt colder than usual. I didn't bother turning on the lights as I sank into the couch, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to confront her the moment she walked through the door, but another part, one I hated to admit existed, was scared of what I'd find if I dug too deep. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. My anger gave way to unease. Where was she? She had never stayed out this late after a work event before. Just as I was about to call her, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. Her name lit up the screen. I answered immediately. Amanda, where are you? Her voice was airy, casual, as if nothing was wrong. Hey, I'm on my way home. The party ran a little late. Are you okay? I love you. The words hit me like a slap. I love you. How dare she? After the way she'd humiliated me tonight? After everything I saw? You love me. I spat, my voice trembling. You have a funny way of showing it, Amanda. Flirting with Brandon all night. Ignoring me like I wasn't even there. What the hell is going on with you? There was a pause, just long enough for me to catch the faint hum of music in the background. You're overreacting, she said, her tone clipped. Brandon is just a colleague. You're reading into things because you're insecure. Insecure, I repeated, my voice rising. You were all over him, Amanda. Everyone could see it. And what about that message you got? You looked like you'd seen a ghost. Stop it, Eric, she snapped. I don't have time for this paranoia right now. Then make time, I shouted, my anger boiling over. Where are you, Amanda? Because you sure as hell don't sound like someone coming home from a party. Another pause, this one longer. When she spoke again, her voice was laced with irritation. I told you, I'm on my way home. You need to calm down before I get there. This is getting ridiculous. Before I could respond, she hung up. I sat there, staring at my phone, my chest heaving. Something wasn't adding up. Her tone, her excuses. It all felt wrong. I opened the Find My app, a feature we'd enabled years ago for emergencies. My heart sank as her location popped up. She wasn't heading home. She wasn't even near the party venue. She was parked at the edge of town, near a dimly lit motel. My blood ran cold. Every fiber of my being wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation, but deep down, I knew there wasn't. Without thinking, I grabbed my jacket and keys and headed for the door. Whatever was happening, I needed to see it with my own eyes. The drive to the motel was a blur of adrenaline and dread. When I pulled into the gravel lot, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn off the ignition. Her car was there, parked in the far corner under a flickering light. I scanned the lot, looking for any sign of her. The rooms were arranged in a horseshoe, their doors lined with rusty numbers. Most of them were dark, but one toward the back had a faint glow seeping through the curtains. I stepped out of my car, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. Each step felt heavier than the last as I approached the lit room. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. As I reached the door, I heard voices, muffled but unmistakable. One of them was Amanda's, the other was Brandon's. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. For a moment, I considered walking away, pretending I never came here. But then I remembered her dismissive tone, her lies, the way she'd made me feel like an outsider in my own marriage. I knocked. The voices stopped. There was a pause, then the sound of shuffling inside. Room service, I called out, my voice dripping with sarcasm. The door opened a crack, and Amanda's face appeared, her eyes wide with panic. She was wearing the same dress from the party, but her hair was disheveled, her lipstick smudged. Eric, she said, her voice faltering. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing, I said, pushing the door open wider. Behind her, Brandon was sitting on the edge of the bed, his shirt unbuttoned, a smug grin on his face. The sight hit me like a punch to the gut. My legs felt like they might give out, but I forced myself to stand tall. You've got 10 seconds to explain, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Amanda opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. For the first time that night, she looked genuinely scared. Good. She should be. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a declaration of war. And I wasn't about to lose. The silence stretched between us like a taut rope about to snap. Amanda stood frozen in the doorway, her lips trembling as she struggled to form a coherent sentence. Behind her, Brandon had the audacity to lean back on the bed, arms behind his head like he owned the place. That smirk on his face, so full of arrogance, ignited a fire in me I could barely control. Well, I pressed, stepping into the room despite Amanda's attempt to block me. You wanted me to calm down earlier. Let's hear your calm explanation for this. Amanda moved to close the door behind me, but I didn't give her the chance. I kicked it shut with a force that rattled the cheap frame. Brandon sat up slightly, his smirk faltering for the first time. This isn't what it looks like, Amanda finally said, her voice shaky. I let out a bitter laugh, the sound foreign even to me. Really? Because it looks like my wife is in a motel room with her coworker at 1 in the morning. Why don't you enlighten me? Amanda? What does this look like? She glanced at Brandon, as if hoping he'd jump in to save her. He didn't. He just shrugged, the smirk creeping back onto his face. We were just talking, he said nonchalantly. Unwinding after the party. No big deal. No big deal, I repeated, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. My eyes locked on Amanda. Is that true? You came all the way here to talk? You couldn't do that in the office? Or, I don't know, at home with your husband? Amanda's face turned red, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. I didn't want to wake you, she said weakly. The sheer audacity of her excuse made me laugh again. But this time there was no humor in it. Wake me? Amanda, I'm not stupid. You've been lying to me all night. Hell, probably for weeks. And now you're caught. And this is the best you've got. Brandon stood up then, brushing invisible dust off his pants. Look, man, I think you're overreacting. Why don't we all just shut up? I snapped, cutting him off. My eyes stayed on Amanda. This isn't about you. Not yet. He froze, his smirk finally disappearing. Amanda reached out, her hand lightly touching my arm, as if that would somehow defuse the situation. Eric, please, she said, her voice softening. Can we just go home and talk about this? I stepped back, pulling away from her touch. Talk? You want to talk now? After everything you've done tonight? I haven't done anything, she protested, her voice rising. You're blowing this out of proportion. Blowing it out of proportion? My voice cracked as I gestured around the room. You're in a motel room with Brandon, Amanda. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is betrayal. So don't stand there and act like I'm the crazy one. For a moment her mask slipped, her shoulders slumped, and she looked at me with something that resembled guilt. But just as quickly her defiance returned. Fine, she snapped, crossing her arms. If you're going to accuse me no matter what I say, then what's the point? Believe whatever you want, Eric. I'm tired of justifying myself to you. I stared at her, stunned by her audacity. Brandon, sensing the tension, moved toward the door. I'll leave you two to sort this out, he muttered, avoiding my gaze. No, I said sharply, stopping him in his tracks. You're not going anywhere. Not until I get some answers. He hesitated, glancing at Amanda, who gave him a pleading look. Brandon, just go, she said, her voice wavering. For once, he obeyed, slipping out the door without another word. I turned back to Amanda, who looked smaller now, like a balloon slowly deflating. Why, Amanda? I asked, my voice quieter but no less intense. What did I do to deserve this? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she sank onto the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I don't know, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe I just needed something different, something exciting. Her words hit me harder than any slap. I staggered back, the air leaving my lungs in a rush. Something different? You mean him? I pointed to the door where Brandon had just exited. That's what you're willing to throw away our marriage for? Tears welled up in her eyes, but they didn't move me. Not this time. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she said, her voice cracking. It just happened. It just happened? I repeated, the words tasting like ash. Amanda, you don't accidentally end up in a motel room with someone. You made choices, deliberate, selfish choices, and now you're asking me to what? Forgive you? Forget this ever happened. I don't know, she whispered, her tears spilling over. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The woman in front of me wasn't the Amanda I thought I knew. She was a stranger, someone I couldn't recognize or trust. Finally, I spoke, my voice steadier than I expected. You've made your choices, Amanda. Now I'm going to make mine. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. Eric, wait. But I was already walking toward the door, leaving her sitting there in the wreckage of her own making. I didn't go home. Not immediately. I drove aimlessly through the empty streets, the sound of my tires on the asphalt the only thing breaking the silence. My mind was a storm of anger, humiliation, and disbelief. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her in that motel room, saw Brandon's smug face, heard her pathetic excuses. Something different, something exciting. The words echoed in my head, twisting like a knife in my chest. Was I really so boring? So easy to discard? We had built a life together. A home, memories, promises whispered in the dark. And for what? For her to throw it all away for some fleeting thrill? Eventually, I found myself parked outside my friend Nate's house. Nate was my best friend, the kind of guy who would show up at 3 a.m. if you needed him, no questions asked. I didn't want to burden him with this, but I couldn't face the emptiness of my house. Not tonight. I texted him a simple, "You awake?" The porch light came on seconds later, and Nate opened the door, squinting against the chill of the night. He took one look at me and stepped aside without a word. Inside, I collapsed onto his couch, the weight of the night catching up to me. Nate handed me a beer and sat down across from me, waiting patiently. She cheated, I said finally, the words bitter on my tongue. Nate's brow furrowed. Amanda? I nodded. With that slimeball from her office. Brandon. Damn, he muttered, shaking his head. I'm sorry, man. What happened? I told him everything. The party, the motel, her excuses. Nate listened quietly, his expression growing darker with every detail. When I finished, he leaned back, running a hand through his hair. What are you gonna do? He asked. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to burn it all down, make her feel the way she's made me feel. But then there's this other part of me. What? This part of me that wonders if I could have stopped it, I said, my voice breaking. If I'd paid more attention, been more, I don't know, exciting or something. Don't do that, Nate said sharply. Don't you dare blame yourself for her choices. She made this bed, Eric. Not you. I nodded, though his words didn't bring much comfort. I just don't know what to do next. Do I leave her? Fight for the marriage? How do you even begin to trust someone after this? You don't, Nate said bluntly. Not unless she proves she's worth trusting again. But that's not something you decide tonight. We sat in silence for a while after that, the beer in my hand going warm as I stared at the floor. Eventually, Nate offered to let me crash on the couch, and I accepted. The idea of going home, of being in the house Amanda and I had made together, was unbearable. But even as I lay there in the dark, exhaustion pulling at me, sleep wouldn't come. My thoughts kept spiraling back to her, to the way she had looked at me in that motel room. Not with guilt or remorse, but with annoyance, like I was the one ruining her night. That was when I realized the full extent of what I had lost. It wasn't just the trust between us, it was the respect. She didn't respect me. Not anymore. And maybe, just maybe, she never had. The thought sent a new wave of anger through me, hardening something inside. If she thought I was weak, a man she could manipulate and discard, she was wrong. By the time morning came, I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't be the one to crumble under this. If Amanda wanted a war, she'd get one. And this time, I wouldn't be blindsided. The next morning, I left Nate's place with a plan forming in my head. My exhaustion from the sleepless night fueled me like adrenaline, sharpening every thought and emotion. Amanda had played her hand, but I wasn't about to sit back and let her dictate the terms of this mess. I drove home, rehearsing what I would say, though deep down, I knew words wouldn't matter. Amanda had crossed a line I couldn't ignore, and now it was time to take control of the situation. When I walked through the door, the house was eerily quiet. Her car was in the driveway, so I knew she was home. I found her in the kitchen, sitting at the counter with a mug of coffee, scrolling through her phone like it was just another morning. She looked up as I entered, her expression guarded. "You didn't come home last night." I dropped my keys on the counter, keeping my eyes locked on hers. "Neither did you. Or have you conveniently forgotten where I found you?" Her jaw tightened, but she didn't respond right away. Instead, she set her phone down and folded her arms. "Eric, I don't want to fight. I've been thinking about everything, and I think we need to talk." "Talk," I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping before I could stop it. "You had plenty of chances to talk last night, Amanda. But instead, you lied, you dismissed me, and you ran off to a motel with Brandon. So forgive me if I'm not feeling chatty right now." She flinched at my words but quickly recovered, her tone shifting to something almost patronizing. "I get that you're angry. Angry doesn't even begin to cover it," I interrupted, my voice rising. "You humiliated me, in front of your coworkers, at that party, and again when I had to find you at that disgusting motel. Do you have any idea how that feels?" "I didn't—" She started to speak but stopped, clearly at a loss. "You didn't what, Amanda?" I pressed. "Didn't mean to cheat? Didn't mean to destroy our marriage? Because from where I'm standing, every choice you've made has been deliberate." She looked away, her hands tightening around her coffee mug. "I know I messed up," she said softly. I wasn't thinking straight. It didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" I repeated, my voice cracking. "You expect me to believe that? After everything I saw?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't let it sway me. I'd seen her cry before, seen her use those tears to manipulate and deflect. Not this time. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know what else to say." I stared at her, the woman I had once loved so deeply, and felt nothing but a hollow ache. "You think sorry fixes this? Amanda, sorry doesn't even scratch the surface. You destroyed the foundation of everything we built together. And for what? A cheap thrill." She didn't answer, her silence speaking volumes. For a moment, the weight of it all threatened to crush me. The betrayal, the lies, the realization that the life I thought we had was gone. But then, like a switch flipping, a cold clarity settled over me. "I'm done," I said, my voice steady. Her head snapped up, panic flashing in her eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm done letting you control the narrative," I said firmly. "Done pretending this marriage can be salvaged. You made your choice, Amanda, and now I'm making mine." "Eric, wait," she pleaded, standing up and reaching for me. "We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes, counseling, therapy, anything. Please, just give me a chance to make it right." Her words might have sounded sincere if I hadn't already seen her in that motel room, hadn't heard her dismiss me like I was an inconvenience. "I gave you chances, Amanda," I said coldly. "I gave you 6 years of loyalty, love, and trust. And you threw it all away the moment you decided I wasn't enough for you." Her tears fell freely now, but I didn't care. I grabbed a duffel bag from the closet and started packing my things. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Leaving," I said simply. "I'll figure out the legal stuff later. But for now, I can't be here. Not with you." "Eric, please," she sobbed, following me as I moved from room to room. "Don't do this. Don't throw everything away." I stopped in the doorway of our bedroom, turning to face her. "I'm not the one who threw it away, Amanda. That was you." Her face crumpled, but I didn't wait for her response. With my bag in hand, I walked out the door, not looking back. As I drove away, a strange sense of relief washed over me. The pain was still there, raw and unrelenting, but beneath it was a glimmer of something I hadn't felt in weeks. Freedom. Amanda might have shattered our marriage, but she wouldn't break me. Not completely. And as I headed back to Nate's, I made a vow to myself. I would rebuild my life, piece by piece, without her. Leaving Amanda wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The next few days were a whirlwind of legal consultations, long talks with Nate, and moments of quiet reflection that turned into searing anger. I couldn't stop replaying everything. Her lies, her dismissiveness, the smugness of Brandon. One thing became clear. I wasn't just walking away. Amanda needed to understand that actions have consequences, and Brandon needed to know that his part in this wasn't going unnoticed. It started with a call to an attorney. I wanted to know my options, and as it turned out, I had more leverage than I thought. We didn't have kids, but we did share finances. Amanda had always managed the household bills while I focused on work. What she didn't know was that I'd meticulously documented every expense, including the ones she couldn't explain. Suspicious hotel charges, unexplained purchases, and nights out that didn't match her supposed work events. Gather everything, the attorney advised. If this goes to court, you want to have the upper hand. By the time I left that meeting, I had a game plan, but it wasn't enough just to protect myself. I wanted Amanda and Brandon to feel the fallout of their choices. The first strike came when I emailed Amanda's boss. It wasn't hard to find the contact info. I'd been to enough of her office events to know the names of key players. I drafted a carefully worded message explaining that I had discovered Amanda and Brandon's affair, complete with a summary of their behavior at the corporate party. I didn't ask for any action to be taken. I didn't need to. The weight of my accusations and the reputation of their company would do the work for me. The second strike was more personal. I reached out to a mutual friend of ours, Rachel. She was one of Amanda's closest confidants, and while I wasn't thrilled about airing my dirty laundry, I knew Rachel would take my side if she heard the truth. "Eric?" she said when she picked up the phone. "What's going on? Amanda told me you left. She didn't tell you why, did she?" I asked, my tone colder than I intended. "No." Rachel's voice was cautious. "What happened?" I laid it all out. Rachel was silent for a long time after I finished, and then she let out a low whistle. "Wow," she said. "I knew something was off, but I didn't think she'd stoop this low." "She did," I said grimly, "and I need your help." Rachel didn't hesitate. "What do you need?" "I need people to know the truth," I said. "Amanda's been playing the victim with everyone, acting like I'm the one who walked out for no reason. I'm not trying to destroy her life, but I'm not letting her rewrite history either." Rachel agreed to help spread the word, and I felt a grim satisfaction knowing Amanda's carefully crafted image was about to crumble. The final strike came when I confronted Brandon directly. It wasn't a planned encounter. I ran into him at a local coffee shop while I was waiting for a meeting with my attorney. He spotted me first, his eyes widening in recognition before he quickly looked away. That smirk he'd worn at the motel was gone, replaced by a nervous tension. "Brandon," I said, approaching his table. My voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "We need to talk." "I don't think that's a good idea," he said, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "Too bad," I said, pulling out a chair and sitting down across from him. "You made it my business the moment you decided to get involved with my wife." He looked around, clearly hoping someone would intervene, but the cafe was quiet, and no one seemed to notice us. "I don't know what you think happened," he began, but I cut him off. "Don't insult my intelligence," I said sharply. "I know exactly what happened, and so does Amanda's boss, by the way." His face paled. "You didn't?" "Oh, I did," I said, leaning in. "And if you think I won't take this further, you're wrong. Stay the hell away from me, my life, and whatever's left of Amanda's." I stood up, leaving him to stew in his own fear and guilt. As I walked out of the cafe, a weight lifted off my chest. It wasn't enough to erase the pain, but it was a start. By the time I got back to Nate's, my phone was already buzzing with messages. Rachel had come through, word was spreading, and Amanda's carefully constructed web of lies was unraveling. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to smile. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But now, I wasn't the one on the defensive. Amanda had declared war, and I was done playing nice. The fallout began faster than I expected. Amanda called me the morning after I confronted Brandon, her number flashing on my screen like a warning light. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. "What?" I answered flatly. "Eric," she began, her voice frantic. "What did you do?" "I don't know what you mean," I said, feigning innocence. "Don't play games with me," she snapped. "Rachel's been calling, saying you've been telling people lies about me, and my boss." Her voice cracked. "He called me in for a meeting tomorrow. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Do you? I shot back, my anger surging. I'm not the one who broke our marriage, Amanda. You did. All I've done is make sure people know the truth. The truth? She repeated, her tone bitter. You're painting me as some kind of monster. It wasn't like that, Eric. You don't understand? Then explain it to me, I said, cutting her off. Explain what I saw at that motel. Explain why you lied to my face and then called me like nothing was wrong. Make me understand, Amanda. There was a long pause, the silence heavy with unspoken words. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, almost childlike. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said. I laughed, the sound sharp and humorless. But you did, over and over again. So spare me the excuses, Amanda. You made your choices. Now deal with the consequences. I hung up before she could reply, my hands shaking as I set the phone down. It wasn't long before the texts started coming in. Apologies, accusations, desperate attempts to shift the blame. I didn't respond. For the first time, I felt like I was taking back control, and I wasn't about to let her manipulate me again. Later that day, Nate walked into the living room where I'd been brooding over my laptop. He tossed a beer onto the table in front of me and sank into the chair opposite. How's the fallout going? He asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. I shrugged. Amanda's freaking out. Brandon's probably hiding under his desk. It's a mess, but it feels right. Nate nodded. Good. They deserve it. But what about you? What's your next move? I hesitated, the question catching me off guard. For days, my focus had been on exposing the affair, on making Amanda and Brandon feel the weight of their actions. But now, with the chaos in full swing, I realized I hadn't given much thought to what came after. I don't know, I admitted. I guess I need to figure out the divorce stuff, get my things, maybe look for a new place. Good, Nate said. But don't forget to think about what you want. Not just what you're walking away from, but what you're walking toward. His words stayed with me as the day went on. What did I want? Revenge had been satisfying, but it wasn't a future. That evening, as I scrolled through my phone, a message from Rachel popped up. Just heard from Amanda. She's a wreck. Wants to know if you'll meet her to talk things out. I stared at the message for a long time, my emotions warring within me. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to leave her to her misery. But another part, the part that still clung to the years we'd spent together, wanted answers. Where and when? I typed back before I could overthink it. Rachel responded with a time and location. A park near Amanda's office. Neutral ground. The next day, I arrived early, sitting on a bench under the shade of a large oak tree. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves, and for a moment, I let myself forget the storm I was in. Amanda arrived shortly after, looking pale and worn. She hesitated when she saw me, then slowly approached, sitting on the edge of the bench as if unsure whether she was welcome. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Thanks for coming, she said finally, her voice soft. I didn't respond, my eyes fixed on the horizon. I know you probably hate me, she continued, her voice trembling, and I don't blame you. But I need you to know that what happened, it wasn't about you. I turned to her, my gaze cold. Don't give me that cliché, Amanda. Everything you did was about me, or at least about what you decided I wasn't. So don't sit here and pretend you didn't make this about us. She flinched but didn't argue. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, handing it to me. What's this? I asked, not taking it. An apology, she said. I wrote it down because I didn't think I could get through saying it out loud. I hesitated, then took the paper, unfolding it slowly. Her handwriting was neat but shaky, the words spilling across the page like a confession. It was everything I'd expected and nothing I hadn't already heard. Excuses, regrets, promises to change. But there was one line that stopped me cold. I didn't know how to tell you I wasn't happy anymore. I looked up at her, my jaw tightening. So, instead of talking to me, you cheated? That was your solution. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. Not anymore. I know I handled it wrong, she whispered. But I loved you, Eric. I still do. Her words hit me like a slap, not because I believed them, but because I realized, in that moment, how hollow they were. No, Amanda, I said, my voice steady. You don't love me. You love the idea of me. But the moment I didn't fit your fantasy, you didn't hesitate to throw me away. Her tears spilled over, but I didn't let it affect me. I stood, the letter crumpled in my hand. This doesn't change anything, I said firmly. You made your choices, and now I'm making mine. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, Amanda. But it's not me. I walked away, leaving her sitting there, her sobs fading into the crisp autumn air. It was over, for real this time, and as I left the park, I felt the weight begin to lift. It wasn't freedom, not yet, but it was the first step. Walking away from Amanda that day was supposed to feel like closure, but as I left the park, I realized closure wasn't what I wanted anymore. Closure implied a neat ending, a tidy bow wrapped around an ugly truth. But there was nothing neat about this. Over the next few days, things spiraled further for Amanda. Rachel kept me updated, not because I asked, but because she seemed determined to make sure I knew how badly Amanda was unraveling. She's a mess, Rachel said during one of our calls. Her boss put her on some kind of probation after your email. Apparently, the company has a strict no fraternization policy, and now everyone in the office knows about her and Brandon. Good, I said without hesitation. She deserves it. Rachel hesitated. She does. But Eric, I've known Amanda for years, and I've never seen her like this. She's falling apart. I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to feel pity for Amanda, but every time I tried, I remembered her at that party. The way she laughed with Brandon. The way she dismissed me like I was a burden. Maybe falling apart is what she needs, I said finally. Rachel sighed but didn't argue. As for Brandon, his comeuppance came swiftly. A mutual acquaintance informed me that he'd been transferred to another branch, effectively a demotion. Apparently, the company decided keeping him in the same office as Amanda was a recipe for disaster. While Amanda and Brandon dealt with the fallout of their actions, I focused on moving forward. The divorce papers were filed, my belongings were packed, and I was staying at Nate's while I searched for a new place. One evening, Nate and I sat on his back porch, beers in hand, watching the sun dip below the horizon. So, he said after a long silence, what's next for you? I took a sip of my beer, letting the question settle. I don't know. I guess I just start over. Nate nodded. Not a bad idea. Clean slate and all that. Yeah, I said, though the thought of starting over felt both liberating and terrifying. As the days turned into weeks, I began to piece my life back together. I found a small apartment on the other side of town, modest but perfect for a fresh start. I focused on work, threw myself into hobbies I'd neglected, and leaned on friends like Nate and Rachel, who reminded me that I wasn't alone in this. But even as I moved forward, Amanda wasn't completely out of my life. One night, as I was settling into my new place, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Amanda. I'm sorry for everything. I know I've lost you, but I hope one day you'll find it in your heart to forgive me. I stared at the message for a long time, my emotions a mix of anger, sadness, and something I couldn't quite name. Forgiveness felt impossible. Maybe one day, I thought, but not now, not yet. I didn't reply. Instead, I set the phone down and stepped out onto the balcony of my new apartment. The night air was cool, carrying the distant hum of the city. For the first time in what felt like forever, I took a deep breath and felt a flicker of peace. Amanda's choices had shattered the life we'd built, but they hadn't shattered me. I was still standing, and that was enough. For now. Weeks turned into a month, and the chaos Amanda had brought into my life began to feel like a distant storm. I'd settled into my new apartment, found solace in a routine, and even started meeting new people. Nothing serious, just casual conversations and shared laughs that reminded me there was life beyond betrayal. But just as I began to feel a sense of normalcy, a message came that threatened to pull me back into the storm. It was a random Thursday evening, and I just finished cooking dinner when my phone buzzed with a notification. I picked it up absent-mindedly, expecting it to be a text from Nate or a work email. Instead, it was from an unfamiliar number. Hey, Eric, it's Brandon. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but we need to talk. Please. For a moment, I thought it was some kind of joke. Why the hell would Brandon reach out to me? What could he possibly have to say that I'd want to hear? I stared at the message, my anger bubbling up. Every instinct told me to ignore it, to delete the message and move on with my night. But something stopped me. Curiosity, maybe, or the nagging feeling that there was more to the story I didn't know. After a few minutes of internal debate, I typed a short reply, "What do you want?" The response came almost immediately, "Can we meet? It's about Amanda." I hesitated, my pulse quickening. What could Brandon possibly have to tell me about Amanda? I almost said no, but then I thought of all the lies Amanda had told me, all the things she'd kept hidden. "Fine," I replied. "Tomorrow, noon, coffee shop on Main." The next day, I arrived at the coffee shop early, choosing a table near the back where we wouldn't be overheard. I didn't have to wait long. Brandon walked in a few minutes later, looking uneasy. His usual smugness was gone, replaced by a nervous energy that made him look smaller. He spotted me and approached cautiously. "Eric," he said, his voice hesitant. "Thanks for meeting me." I didn't respond, just gestured for him to sit. He took the seat across from me, fidgeting with his coffee cup. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the tension thick between us. "Get to the point," I said finally. He nodded, swallowing hard. "I know I screwed up," he began, his voice low. "I never should have gotten involved with Amanda. It was wrong and I regret it. But there's something you need to know." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "I'm listening." Brandon hesitated, glancing around as if to make sure no one else was listening. Then he leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's been lying to both of us." I narrowed my eyes. "What are you talking about?" "She told me you two were already separated when we started." "You know," he said, avoiding my gaze. "She made it seem like your marriage was over, like you were just staying together for convenience or appearances." My jaw tightened, anger flaring. "That's bullshit, and you know it." "I know that now," Brandon said quickly. "But at the time I believed her. She told me you were controlling, that you didn't care about her anymore. She said she was just waiting for the right time to leave." His words hit me like a gut punch, but I kept my expression cold. "And you didn't think to question any of that?" "I was an idiot," he admitted, his voice filled with regret. "I wanted to believe her because it made what we were doing seem less wrong." I stared at him, my emotions warring. On one hand, I wanted to throttle him for being so gullible, for letting Amanda manipulate him so easily. But on the other hand, his story fit. Amanda had always been good at spinning narratives, at telling people what they wanted to hear. "There's more," Brandon said, pulling me out of my thoughts. I raised an eyebrow. "More?" He nodded, his expression grim. "After you confronted us, she told me to stay away from her, said it was over between us. But then, a week ago, she started reaching out again. Late-night texts, calls. She said she needed someone to talk to, that she was struggling. I told her I didn't want to get involved again. But you did," I said, my voice flat. He nodded, shame written all over his face. "She showed up at my apartment a few nights ago. She was drunk, crying about how she'd ruined everything. I let her in, and we talked, but it was weird." "Weird how?" Brandon hesitated, then said, "She kept talking about you, about how you'd moved on, how you didn't even seem hurt anymore. It was like she couldn't stand the idea of you being okay without her." His words sent a chill down my spine. "She's not letting go, Eric," Brandon said, his voice serious. "I think she's spiraling, and I don't know what she's capable of anymore." I stared at him, my mind racing. Amanda's behavior had been erratic lately, but I chalked it up to guilt and the consequences of her actions. Now, I wasn't so sure. "I don't trust you," I said finally, my voice hard. "But I'll keep this in mind." Brandon nodded, seeming to accept my distrust. "I get it. Just be careful. She's not who you think she is." He stood, leaving me alone at the table with a storm of thoughts swirling in my head. As I walked out of the coffee shop, one thing became clear. Amanda wasn't just struggling to accept the end of our marriage. She was unraveling in ways I hadn't anticipated. And whatever came next, I had to be ready for it. The following week passed like the calm before a storm. I tried to push Brandon's warnings out of my mind, but they clung to me like a shadow. Amanda hadn't reached out since our meeting in the park, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't done. That feeling was confirmed on a quiet Saturday evening. I was sitting in my living room, watching TV, when my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a text from Amanda. "We need to talk. It's important. Please." My stomach churned. The last thing I wanted was another confrontation, but something about the message felt different. Urgent. "What do you want, Amanda?" I replied, already bracing myself for the worst. Her response came quickly. "I'm outside." I froze. My heart pounded as I walked to the window and peered through the blinds. Sure enough, her car was parked at the curb, and she was standing beside it, arms wrapped around herself as if to ward off the chill. For a moment, I considered ignoring her, but the look on her face, haunted, desperate, made me pause. With a sigh, I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my distance. Amanda's eyes were red, her makeup smudged as if she'd been crying. "I had to see you," she said, her voice trembling. "This isn't the time, Amanda," I said firmly. "We've already said everything that needs to be said." "No, we haven't," she said, her tone rising. "You don't understand, Eric. I'm falling apart. I can't eat. I can't sleep. I feel like I'm losing my mind." "That's not my problem anymore," I said coldly. Her face crumpled, and she took a step closer. "Please, just listen to me. I made a mistake. Terrible mistake. But I still love you, Eric. I never stopped loving you." The words cut through the night like a dagger, but they didn't have the power they once would have. I stared at her, unblinking. "You don't get to say that," I said quietly. "Not after what you did." "I was stupid," she said, her voice cracking. "I let my insecurities get the better of me. I thought Brandon would fill some void, but he didn't. He made everything worse. And now I'm standing here, begging you to forgive me because I don't know how to move on without you." Her honesty was disarming, but it didn't change the reality of what had happened. "I don't owe you forgiveness," I said, my tone sharp. "You didn't just hurt me, Amanda. You destroyed us. And now that you're finally feeling the consequences, you want me to fix it? That's not how this works." Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't waver. "Eric, please," she whispered. "Just tell me what to do. Tell me how to make this right." "You can't," I said simply. Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment, I thought she might leave. But then, to my surprise, she straightened, her expression hardening. "You think you're so perfect," she said bitterly. "Like you didn't play a part in this." I blinked, stunned by the sudden shift. "What the hell are you talking about? You were distant," she spat. "Always working, always focused on everything but me. Do you have any idea how lonely I felt? How invisible?" Her words stung, but I didn't let her see it. "That's rich," I said, laughing bitterly. "You had every opportunity to tell me how you felt. But instead you lied, you cheated, and you threw our marriage away." Amanda's face twisted with anger, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned on her heel and stormed back to her car. As she climbed in, she rolled down the window and shouted one last thing. "You'll regret this, Eric. You'll see." Her words echoed in the still night air as she sped off, leaving me standing there, a mix of anger and relief coursing through me. As I walked back inside, I realized something profound. Amanda wasn't just fighting to save our marriage. She was fighting to save the version of herself that existed in my eyes. The version she had destroyed. But that version of her was gone, and no amount of begging or blaming could bring it back. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a sense of finality. Amanda's chapter in my life was over, and whatever came next, it wouldn't include her. I locked the door, turned off the lights, and went to bed, ready to face a future that was finally mine to shape.